Hello dear students, welcome to the English class. Today I have come with a beautiful story for you. The title of the story is Little Match Girl. The story is about a young girl, a little girl who was very poor, who tried to sell matches in the streets. As the story opens, you can see the little girl. She's walking through the street and it was New Year's Eve. And the weather was really cold. The little girl, she was very poor and she didn't have enough clothes to protect herself from the cold weather. So dear students, let us read the story and find out what happened to the young girl.
The Little Match Girl. It was a bitterly cold day. Snow was falling and it was dark. It was also the last day of the old year, New Year's Eve. A little girl walked in bitter cold and gathering darkness. She was a thin, shivering little girl wearing a cotton dress and no shawl. Her legs were blue with cold. In her basket, she carried many matchboxes. As the story opens, we can see a small girl walking through the street. It was a bitterly cold day. It was an extremely cold day. It was winter season, so the weather was extremely cold. Snow was falling and it was dark. Now it is dark and the snow was falling. And it was also the last day of old year, New Year's Eve. What do you mean by New Year's Eve? The previous day of New Year. And it was the last day of the old year. And it is New Year's Eve. A little girl walked in the bitter cold and gathering darkness. You can see a small girl, a little girl. She is walking through the street in bitter cold. The weather is extremely cold, and in that cold weather, she was walking through the street. She was a thin, shivering little girl. She was very thin. She is very poor. She is very thin. She was shivering. Why she was shivering? Because of the cold weather. She was walking through the street in that cold weather. That is why she was shivering. Wearing a cotton dress and no shawl. She was wearing only a cotton dress. Actually, you need woolen clothes to keep yourself warm during the winter season. But she was not having woolen clothes. She does not have money to buy woolen clothes. She was only having cotton dress. That will not keep you warm. And she was not having shawl. She does not have money to buy shawl. So she does not have a shawl to cover herself. So she was shivering because of cold. Her legs were blue with cold. She was not having proper shoes to cover her feet. She was wearing a large chappals and it was not suitable for the winter season. So her legs were cold and it became blue due to cold. In her basket, she carried many matchboxes and she was holding a basket in her hand, and in that basket there were a lot of matchboxes. So she was trying to sell matchboxes. The story is actually about a little girl, a young girl who tries to sell matches. She is a little match girl, or she is a little match seller. She had not sold a single matchbox that day and was afraid to go home because she would get a beating from her father. She crept along, shivering and hungry, the poor little match girl. The snowflakes fell on her dark curls. Lights were shining in every house. A delicious smell of cooking came from all the houses. It was New Year's Eve, and the little girl longed for a warm room and a hot dinner. Her own house was cold. The wind came in through the broken roof and broken walls. She knew there was no more food left in the house. If only she could get warm. So now you can see the little match seller, the little match girl walking through the street in that cold weather. She had not sold a single matchbox that day. That day she was not able to sell a single matchbox. And she was afraid to go home because she would get a beating from her father. And she was not able to go home. She was so afraid to go home. Why? Because she would get beating from her father for not selling a single matchbox that day. So she crept along. She moved silently. Crept along means she moved along silently, shivering and hungry. Because of the cold weather, she was shivering and she was hungry too. She does not have any money to buy food. She was so poor. She didn't eat anything. She was so hungry. The poor little match girl. The snowflakes fell on her dark curls. The little girl was not having a cap or a shawl to cover her head or to protect her head from the cold weather. So the snowflakes fell on her dark curls or her dark hair. Lights were shining in every house. So it was New Year's Eve and everybody was celebrating. So the lights were shining in every house. A delicious smell of cooking came from all the houses. As I have already told, it was New Year's Eve and everyone was celebrating and everyone was preparing delicious food items. So a delicious smell of cooking came from all the houses. It was New Year's Eve and the little girl longed for a warm room and a hot dinner. So little girl, our poor little girl also wished to have a warm room so that she can rest and wished to have a hot dinner. Her own house was cold. The wind came in through the broken roof and the broken walls. Her house was cold. Why? Because she was having broken roof and broken walls in her house. So through this broken roof and broken wall, the cold wind used to come in and the house was really cold. She knew there was no more food left in the house if only she could get warm. So she was not having enough food in her home also. She was not able to earn anything on that day. She was not able to sell a single matchbox. So she was not having enough money to buy food. And at her home also, she was not having enough food. She pulled out a match and struck it. Puff, it gave out a small orange glow. It had a small flame, but what a strange light it gave. The girl felt she was sitting in front of a lovely warm stove and was warming herself at the stove. Suddenly, the match went out and there was no glow. There was only the darkness, the cold, and the burnt out match in her hand. So the little girl was walking through the street in that cold weather. She is now so tired, so she sat down and to warm herself, she pulled out a match and struck it. And the match burnt with a small orange glow. With a small orange light, the match burnt. It had a small flame. It gave out a small flame. And now, when she struck the match, she went to another world. She went to a dreamy world. And the girl felt that she was sitting in front of a lovely warm stove and was warming herself. So she now went to an imaginary world, or she is now imagining something. What was that? She was imagining that she was sitting in front of a lovely warm stove and she was warming herself. So when she struck the match gave out an orange glow. The match burnt and it gave out an orange glow. And in that orange glow, she saw herself sitting in front of a stove and warming herself. Suddenly, the match went out. And what happened? There was no glow. There was complete darkness. There was no light, no glow. And she is again sitting there in that cold weather with a burnt out match in her hand. She struck another match. It burned bright and she could clearly see a table laid with beautiful china and a white tablecloth and spotless white napkins. And best of all was the food. The little girl stretched out her hand to the food and the match went out with a scissor. Poor child! Nothing could be seen but the old brick wall and the steps of the house where she was sitting. Now the little girl struck another match. It burnt bright, and in that brightness of the match, she could see something. What was that? She could clearly see a table laid with beautiful china and a white tablecloth and spotless white napkins. So when she struck another match, she went again into an imaginary world. She saw something. What was that? She saw a beautiful dining table covered with white tablecloths with spotless white napkins. Then on the dining table, there were beautiful plates, and the best thing was the food. Delicious food items were served in those plates. And the little girl actually stretched her hand out to get the food items. But what happened? Suddenly the match went out with a sizzle. With a sizzle mean with a sound, the match went out, and she could see only darkness. Nothing could be seen but old brick wall and the steps of the house where she was sitting. So when she struck the match again, she saw a delicious food item served on a beautiful dining table. But now, when the match went out, she was in darkness again, and she could not see anything. She could see only the old brick wall and the steps of the house on which she was sitting.
So dear students, in this video you learned about a little match girl. She was very poor, hungry and shivering with cold, and she saw a lot of dreams. She went into a dreamy world where she saw herself warming in front of a stove, and she also saw a dining table, a beautiful dining table with delicious food items. All these things were just imagination. Now, what happened to this little girl? Did she dream about anything else? Did anyone come to help her? You will learn all these things in the next video. Till then, take care. Bye.